My name is Pam Chrysosimo, and this summer I've been working at a lab in at UCSD. Basically, my job has been to isolate plasma for DNA injections for mice, that is. I'm a double major at Stanford, or at least I hope to be. At this point, I'm going undeclared, and so I'm majoring in bio, and eventually I want to go to med school. So volunteering at a laboratory seemed like a pretty good idea, and I've actually learned a phenomenal amount. I came into the lab at ground zero, knowing nothing about molecular bio, and now I've learned a lot this summer. And so my job is to make DNA, basically, and in order to make DNA, I need to go through two major steps. And the first step is growing up the bugs or bacteria, and second step is going through a process which breaks down the bugs, breaks down the bacteria, the cell walls, and removes the proteins and stuff. And then isolate the DNA from that. So what I'm going to describe is how to start a culture of DNA, start a small culture of DNA, and that's called inoculation. So the first thing I need to do is I need to figure out what number the plasmid is. For example, today my boss told me to that I'd have to make a culture of NCMVB1 tomorrow. So in order to do that, I need to grow the bugs up overnight. And so I go into her catalog of DNA. Number for BNC is number 32. So I need to remember that number because when I go into the freezer, there's a lot of DNA into little tubes and with certain numbers, and then so rather than wasting my time looking on the tables of all the tubes, there's numbers on the top, so I just remember the number 32. And so the first thing that Delphine taught me was to do label everything. So I got a piece of colored tape, write the number 32. You need three things when you label. You need the name of what it is, the date, and your initials. And so I put number 32, NCMV B71. The date is 8/96, and PC are my initials. And I stick the colored tape on a 3 mil. And actually, I get a 10 milliliter culture tube, and I allocate milliliters LB into it. LB is Luria broth, and Luria broth is the media in which the bacteria grow. The bugs grow, and so I allocate 3 milliliters of LB into the culture tube. In order to allocate that amount, we need to be precise. So we have a tool called the pipette aid, and it's kind of a suction thing. Chemistry use bulbs, but this is more of a mechanic thing. We stick the pipette into the pipette aid and suction up 3 mils of LB, and we put 3 mils of LB into the culture tube. And after that, I need this plasmid. It has to be resistant, so we go into the freezer, and in my box I have a little tube of A100 and A100 stands for ampicillin, 100 milligrams per milliliter. And so since this is frozen, I need to take the ampicillin out of the freezer and put it on the heat block in order to thaw it, because you can't pipette out of something that's frozen. So I put it on the heat block, and once it's thawed, I get a different thing called a pipette men, which is blue, and you use it to pipette small amounts up. So I pipette up 3 microliters, which is, we call them, written, it's called AMDA, LMBDA, that's a Greek letter. And I pipette 3 lambda of the thawed ampicillin and inject that into the 3 mils of LB. And so now any bacteria or any bugs I grow in the lab will be ampicillin resistant. And so when I make sure to put that back in the freezer, because that needs to be frozen and it can't be left outside. And then after that's ready, I make sure the cap is on and the label is on, make sure everything's okay, and then I need to go into the freezer room in order to get my bugs. So now that the media is ready, and the culture tube is ready, and everything's labeled, then I go into the freezer room, and the bacteria is stored at negative 80 degrees Celsius. So I make sure before I start, always have my gloves on because these things are biohazardous. So I take my tray where I have my 10 ml culture tube, and then I take my pipette men, a box of pipette tips, and also that's it. Then I go into the freezer room and I open the negative 80 degree freezer and I pull up the box, the deep box where the bacteria is stored. So then I pull out the box and I look for number 32. So then I take out my little tube which has 32 on it, and I put the rest of the box, I close the box, I put it back in the freezer because you don't want all the other things to be thawing out at once. So you make sure to close that, and then I have my pipette, my box of pipette tips, and then, so I scrape a little bit. Using my pipette tip, I scrape a little bit of the NCMV B71 with the end of my tip and put a little chunk of that into the 3 mils of LB plus amp. So then I put that in there, and then I pipette up and pipette down in order to remove anything that might have gotten stuck in the pipette. And then if the glycerol stock is too frozen and you can't isolate a chunk that you remove, then you take out some of the LB, you pipette up and squirt some of that room temperature LB into the frozen glycerol stock in order to soften it so you have kind of like a slushy mush. And then you can remove some of the bacteria that's frozen there because it's softened, and then you can remove a chunk from there. So after you've done that, you scrape a little bit and then put it into the LB amp, and then you twist the cover back on, you put it back in the negative 80 degree freezer, so only that you maybe chilled a little bit, gotten maybe a little bit warmer. So then you put it back, make sure nothing else is thawed, and then so you have that into solution because it defrosts pretty quickly. So you have your bugs in solution, then you make sure to dispose of your pipette tips and biohazardous waste because it's biohazardous and you don't want anything else to be growing out of there. And then you take the 3 ml culture tube, it's labeled, and you put it into the shaker room. And the shaker room is where my bugs will grow overnight. But when I'm doing a small culture, first of all, you need to turn down the shaker so that it's not turning so fast. And then you turn it down, and then you wait till it comes to a complete stop. And after that, you put the 10 ml culture tube on the shaker, then you turn it up and close the door. It's kept at 37 degrees so that you make sure that the shaker comes on again, because a lot of people have different stuff growing on there. And after that, after it's done, then you let it incubate for about 6 or 7 hours, or however long enough you've been working there. And so you need a big culture, right before you leave. You take a small culture, and then you take the small culture and separate that.